Welcome to Groups This Week. As a church, we exist to help all people become fully devoted followers of Jesus. We believe doing life together is a crucial part of that journey. During this time, we're going to unpack and dig deeper into the sermon we heard this past week. Let's dive in as we continue to grow in our faith, knowledge, and love of Jesus together. Well, hey everyone, welcome to Community Groups This Week. Cam, thanks for sitting down with us. And this week we're talking about silence and solitude, which I think can be one of those spiritual rhythms as we're in this series on rhythms. It can be one of those rhythms that is maybe more neglected or less well known. And I think as we begin our conversation, Cam, I think I want to touch on something that many of us can feel, which is that we can be so uncomfortable with silence. Mm-hmm. Now, why do you think that is? Why are we so awkward or uncomfortable with silence?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And there's a couple things that come to mind. I do think there is something, whether it's like something about our species, like in our DNA, or something about us as a culture that really likes noise. And what I mean by noise is not just sound, but we always feel like we need to be like thinking about something, problem solving, fixing something, learning something, enjoying something. You know what I mean? And so we feel like we have this constant need for, I think, like input into our lives. And so when all of a sudden there's silence, I think two things happen. We feel bored, right? And I think the second thing that kind of happens is we feel like, oh, this isn't very productive. Nothing's being accomplished through this, you know? And there's something I think that we feel kind of uncomfortable with a little bit. But there's a second piece as well. I think some of us are afraid of the silence. Because it's like in the silence, you might have like this amazing epiphany or like as Christians, we'll say like, we'll hear from God, but also in the silence, I think we're afraid of like the voices that might start speaking to us, not in the sense of like voices in your head or something like that, but just that voice of anxiety, that voice of condemnation, that voice of you're not good enough. And I think that we really are afraid of that. You know, we're afraid of opening ourselves up to that. So it's like, okay, put on the podcast, turn on the TV, have the radio going in the car, and or just be receiving information, like even if it's in, you know, quiet moments that we find ourselves in, just sitting in our living room, right? And I think we struggle with that. Would you agree?
No, the input's just constant, like you're saying, right? And I think, those are some really good insights, what you brought up. And I wonder if even there's maybe part of it is fear of God not speaking. Like, okay, we're taking this time to be silent, try to be attuned to the voice of God, and what if there's nothing? What if we don't sense him saying anything? Then what does that mean? Am I not a good Christian? Do I not hear the voice of God? And I don't know. I just wonder if maybe that's part of it, is that we wonder if it's just gonna be, you know, kind of like hitting dead ends and then feeling like we're failing spiritually or something to that degree.
Is he going to show up for me? Like, is he going to show up? Is he going to speak? And if I take this time and this whole thing, someone else did it and they said they heard from God. Well, that definitely could be a fear, especially for Christians.
So maybe that begs the next question, which is like, okay, why should we actually do this? Like, why is silence and solitude so important to do?
Well, the answer that we often will go to with these things is we go, well, Jesus did it, right? And keep in mind that Jesus is like the fullness of God and also the fullness of what it means to be a human being.
That's right.
And he was perfect. Really, like in a lot of ways, for instance, like when he got baptized, did he really need to be baptized? That kind of thing. But we see him setting an example of what it means to be fully human. And for Jesus to be fully human, there's something to be said about, he says to be fully human is to be in relationship with God and to spend time with his Father. And so even Jesus needed input from the Father. Even Jesus needed to get away from the crowds and to quiet his mind and his heart. And so first and foremost, we do see Jesus doing that, and we as followers of Jesus, we want to pattern our lives after that. And so that's the first thing that comes to mind. What do you think?
Yeah. I think like in my experience, like, man, I haven't done a lot of extended periods of time, like in silence and solitude, but I do remember doing like a one night kind of silent retreat at like a monastery in Abbotsford.
Yeah.
And I remember something that was interesting that I realized is after quite some time of being in silence, no one to talk to, I realized like how dependent I am on stimuli around me for feedback from people, for affirmation from people.
Yeah.
And you're like being weaned off of that so that the only voice that you really have to listen to is God as you consult the scriptures and, you know, as you're just listening for what he has to say to you. And so I think it's, you are more fully aware that like your identity and your worth is found in the words that Jesus says about you.
Yeah.
When you are removed from the voices of the world or those who are close to you, as important as they may be.
Yeah.
I think it creates space for God to affirm who you are, and it kind of creates like a fast in a way
totally.
from the voices around you.
Yeah, and I think there's like another piece here too, like why should we do this, right? Like why should we be silent and seek out solitude with the Lord? And I think it's for the same reasons we are intentional with other relationships in our lives. Like it's like, you know, don't get me wrong, I believe that God can speak to us every day in all things, from like, you know, the cleaning our house to driving our car. Those are moments that God can speak to us. But when we have these really intentional moments where we get away, what happens when we do that with friends or family? We build relationship, right? And so I think there's this intentionality to silence and solitude that says, God, I want to build relationship with you. I want to get away with you and spend time and hear from you and hear your thoughts and you hear my thoughts. And so I think that's the beauty of silence and solitude. It's not that God can't meet you in your 9 to 5.
Totally.
It's that it's the same as you saying, hey, it's date night to your wife, or saying to your best friend, hey, let's, you know, go grab some wings and watch a hockey game. Or, you know, it's this intentionality to say, this relationship matters and I'm going to make time for it.
So good. I think, you know, we all have stuff on our heart and our souls, and until we like sit in the silence and the quiet, sometimes that stuff doesn't come to the surface.
Totally.
And it's as we do that, hey, we surrender it to God. We invite him into that, and he can meet us and minister to us in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, with this rhythm series, we really want to give people practical tools for each of these different spiritual disciplines or rhythms. And so for someone who is maybe more unfamiliar with silence and solitude, maybe you haven't engaged with it, or you're just looking for some handles, any kind of tips or advice on how to start implementing this? Yeah.
I think first and foremost, what I would say is, like, you've heard this book probably, Atomic Habits. It talks about like starting small, right? So it's not like, okay, every week I'm gonna have a 24-hour silence solitude retreat and get away. It's just like, it's this really unattainable goal in a lot of ways for many of our lives. So I would just say start small. Like, what does it look like to maybe go, hey, I'm gonna spend 10 minutes or 20 minutes a couple times this week. I'm gonna shut off my phone. I'm gonna turn off the radio, and I'm just gonna sit in silence and listen or speak to God or read his word. And so just starting small. But the other thing, and this is what I found, Ryan, because we can all find those small moments, but I think there's also that intentionality piece. So like, I knew I was preaching about this a few months ago. And so I said to myself, okay, well, you probably should like practice this, right? And so I actually planned a couple of different days, and I put it on the calendar. And I just called them S&S days, right? Silence, solitude days, where I would intentionally get away from my own room and my own house and my own space, go somewhere, shut off the phone, and be intentional about it. Kind of like what you did with the monastery, right? Like where you're just like, hey, this is like an intentional choice that I'm choosing to do this. And so, you know, I chose to do it once a month. And I think that's a lot more attainable if you want to start practicing this. And by the way, it wasn't like 24 hours or 48 hours. It was like for 5 hours, of just choosing to slow down, choosing to shut out the voices, choosing to listen, build relationship with God, and see what He has to say. And I was blown away by my experiences of doing that. Like, the first 45 minutes is really tough.
Yeah.
Just thoughts going through your head, the whole thing.
You want to check your phone, like all that. Yeah.
Exactly. But then if you slow down enough, you're just intentional about it. It's amazing. God will meet you in those moments. Yeah.
Amazing. Cool. Well, hey, thanks so much, Cam, for bringing some thoughts into how we can integrate silence and solitude into our lives. So we hope you have a great conversation, and we'll maybe throw some more practical tips in the discussion guide for you to engage with this practice along the way. So we hope you enjoyed the teaching today. If you're wanting to follow along with our community group's discussion guide with your group, you can head to cachurch.ca/media, where you can find the discussion guide. Not only are there questions there related to the sermon, but there's also prayer prompts that relate to the passage or the topic that we were talking about, and practices that you can, on an individual level or a group level, begin integrating into your life to not only bring this knowledge into your mind, but to begin living it out.